but we wanted to at least give you an idea of when to expect key deliverables as part of this process, so that you are on the lookout for things and know what to look for and what not to look for. We want to kind of reduce any anxiety that exists about what data should be in there and what shouldn't. So please be on the lookout for those types of communications from us as well. We're sending an email every Monday. Is kind of our anticipated delivery for that, to let you know what's going on and where to look. You can see the sample FAQ here, and what's been available this week on multilingual learners, with some information on what to do next. We want clarity there, so district leaders are aware of what to check, when to check, how to check it, and then also have some FAQ information about what that might look like, and why certain things might be the way they are, as we work to promote clarity and alignment on the district side. We've also engaged in several coding tests with your districts. Last year, I talked about this a good bit, and even in the spring, in terms of the delivery of the 2025 report cards, we found errors at multiple levels, right? I'm sure you did too. There's school level errors, district level errors, there's power school errors, and there's SCDE errors, right? And what we've worked to do this year is to improve the accuracy at all those stages, to ensure that when we get to the point where we're doing a report card, we have accuracy across the board and we have good coding. And the next few slides here are going to celebrate a lot of the work that we've done with districts over the last few months to bring that work to success, and helping realize some of those goals. So some of the key areas that were challenges for us last year were things like CTE completers and work-based learning, as well as the cohort data. And so we rewrote existing code, we wrote new code, we tested that code with many districts prior to the denominator corrections window, and then we shared files with districts. Some of you are on the call. We tried to pick folks who were from different size districts, so we have different resources. We tried to pick veteran accountability leaders, as well as folks who were newer to the job, because we really wanted to see kind of across all levels what the data was looking like. Was it accurate? Did it match what we felt it should be on the ground? You can see on this slide the results of some of those early tests on those specific data points to see were we matching on CTE completer, on work-based learning, or on who should be included in the 9GR23 cohort. So you can see there's different districts that were engaged in those tests. And you can see the metric is in column 2. You can see the number of students and who were included and the number who matched. But the key information I want to draw your attention to really is that final slide, the percent correct. What we saw this year was in the development of that code and working with districts to improve the accuracy of the coding and improving SCDE's code, our match rate and the percent we anticipated being correct were the lowest we saw in any district was 99.33%. And in several districts, we were at 100% match rate. And what that tells us is that one, we've got the data where it needs to be. It's landing in the appropriate space. It's being coded correctly. And then two, SCDE code is correctly picking up that data and recognizing those successes. And we've got students getting credit and schools getting credit for the work that's happening. And I think that speaks to a lot of the work that folks on this call put into that, and folks in this room have put into it, to ensuring we can deliver those data with accuracy. And those were data points that we really struggled with last year. If you think back to the corrections windows we did, many were in response to issues around those data points statewide. We're continuing that numerator testing process here for different data points. We've done grad rate already. We've done on track. We've done 5-year student success. We've done multilingual learners progress. We've done CCR. And we'll be doing this week, we'll be doing high school achievement and preparing for success, which, as you know, was one of the issues we faced during the denominator corrections window, but we're going to be testing that piece this week. With those metrics that we've already tested, you can see our success rate again, like high school student success. The on-track metric is in column 2. The 5th-year student success also in column 2. That's the next section down, grad rate and ML progress. You can see that virtually every number here is above 99%, several at 100%. We had 2 metrics in different districts where we were at 97.75 or 97.71. But we've been using this opportunity to do 2 things. One, to communicate with districts about our code and what we're seeing. 2, to help refine and bring clarity to folks about what the rules are, because in some cases we've been able to highlight, actually, this is what the rule is. So it's almost served as a professional development piece as well, as we work to educate folks on this is actually what we're seeing and why we're seeing it and why we've got it coded this way. But it's been a good back and forth process. We've engaged districts from around the state on this. One of our goals throughout the process has been to engage different districts for every metric, because we want as many folks included in that process as possible, because we really feel that gives us better insight into what's working and what's not working. So we appreciate your engagement. If you've been involved with us on those data checks, we really do feel like it's putting us in a great position here for when we get for time for the actual numerator corrections, that we'll be in good shape. Era is going to be talking to us about the denominator corrections here on the next slide, which I've inadvertently pulled up. But one thing I think we're going to see here, because of the work that we've put in here with districts, the work that you've put in to ensure the data is accurate, and the work we've done to make sure the PowerSchool data is landing correctly, is I think, and Era is going to get to this, we didn't see a ton of requests for changes in the denominator corrections window. And I really do feel pretty strongly that the work we've put in here for the numerator corrections window, we're probably going to see similar levels of requests, because I do think that thanks to your work, thanks to our work, we're in great position to deliver accurate data on that first delivery of the numerator files. And Era is going to walk you through some data on the denominator corrections piece, just to highlight some of the great successes that we saw there with you all during that window, and to stress how much we appreciate your work to get us where we need to be. So turn it over to Era now.
All righty, y'all. Well, we'll go through just to give you an overview, because of course you only know what your district submitted for denominator corrections, and we want to give you a little bit of information about how that worked for the overall state. So overall, we had 21 districts who requested no corrections at all across any tab. We had 3 districts that we did not hear back from, but of the 78 districts that we did hear back from, we had an average percent requested of 0.14% change request. And then I've broken down just in some kind of brackets there of what the other, like the ranges there that the percent changes came into. But even where we broke it down, where we could have some kind of cut points, it's still all generally less than 1%. That's what you can kind of see across the board. We did have a few districts with more than 1% of changes, but the majority, as you can see, 60.26% were less than 1% of changes. That was 47 districts with less than 0.1% of changes. So not a lot of corrections to denominator window, giving you a breakdown of each of the different metrics. For elementary and middle school academic achievement, preparing for success, we had 58 districts with no corrections. And again, the majority of that, 88.46%, were less than 0.1 at 69 districts, with our average there being at 0.04. As we go into ML Progress, we had a percent request of 0.24, and with the majority again being at less than 0.1, 62 districts requesting no corrections. And even as we went to process some of those, when we were working through the ones that we had even approved just based on reading your plans, once we got into all the details of the data, we had some back and forth with a few different districts just to say, hey, as we went to load these, it won't load for this or that reason. And they would say, oh, actually, you know what? That's right. And so we even had some requests that we had approved retracted once we really started going in and trying to apply that to the code. So again, that was kind of an understanding of all the rules and the ins and outs there. As we look at graduation rate, this was our greatest area of requests. And we know that cohort has lived through years of just many things of updating, right, and using the cohort maintenance page and how to have that data all in. But we still had 45 districts with no corrections to graduation rate. So thank you to everyone for checking your coding, using cohort maintenance, just and cohort verification dashboard, everything that you did. And still the majority, 64%, were at less than 0.1% of changes. And our average there was at 0.72%. First, second, third year on track, 40 districts with no changes there. Similar in outcomes to graduation rate, but still the majority less than 0.1%, and our average at 0.38. And fifth year success, not a lot of requests there. This is our smallest bucket of requests, as we know that is a roll up of that 9GR22 as they have now become fifth years. There was 0.02 percent change requests, 71 districts with no corrections, and you can see the vast majority of those were less than 0.1%. So just giving you a summary here, with 50 of our plans that were submitted, we were able to review the plan. There were clear reasons for submission. Those reasons aligned with the rules of the metric. A lot of times people were noting coding issues and putting plans in for how they wanted to make some improvements for the future. We did have 5 that were partial acceptance and 2 that were rejected just based on the plan. The main reason of partial acceptance or rejection was people or districts asking for SNT corrections during the denominator window. And if you'll remember, that SNT cannot be applied at all until numerator window because we have to check for a test score first. So that was the main reason of rejection, was just a little bit of a misunderstanding there of where SNT fell in. So that was, essentially the main piece. Or if the request was just not addressed in the plan at all. So maybe your template said, I want to make corrections about graduation rate, but then in your plan, there was no mention of graduation rate or 9GR 23 or cohort maintenance or anything that would have really connected to that metric. So, but you can see those numbers were very small, 5 with partial, 2 with rejected, 21 districts noting no correction, and 3 that we didn't hear back from. Overall, total number of just individual line records that were requested was only 973 line item requested for denominator correction. So we just wanted to really shout out to everyone. Amazing job with your data coding. It's only continuing to improve and continuing to get better. We saw a lot of great stuff in your plans, and so thank you for the work that you have put in to help our data meet those big goals and missions, right, of being accurate and being on time and letting you have those quality report cards that you can trust and believe in. So denominator for high school achievement. Van, you going to give us a little bit of an update there?
Yeah. So one of the things we identified during the denominator corrections window, thanks to several of our districts who were working with us on this challenge, was that we looked at achievement and prep for success, which are based on those EOC scores. When we delivered the denominator file to you, we had not yet received the full file from the vendor for the EOC EP scores. What we then identified was that our existing code for academic achievement and preparing for success was dependent on having that full file in. But if you think about what we've been talking about so far, trying to deliver data earlier, trying to deliver data accurately, what we found there was that critical dependency created an issue for us, right? And we needed that full file in. So took a look at it over the first 2 days of that week and ultimately made the decision, let's just pivot on this one. We have to make this one work. So the decision we arrived at during that denominator corrections window was that we would simply delay that denominator corrections piece for EOCP associated metrics until the numerator window. So now we have that data in. The delay gives us time now to produce accurate code around those metrics. So we apologize for that issue. Just ended up being a critical dependency for us. I think we've got a good plan in place, though, to address that and ensure that folks still have time to look at that from a denominator and numerator standpoint. As we mentioned earlier, we are revising and testing that code. That's happening this week. But overall, I think the denominator correction window was a success. We had a proactive plan for it. We had clear expectations, clear communication, I think, and we heard great feedback from districts throughout the process. And we had folks engaged throughout that week, looking at the data with us, identifying challenges, ultimately, at the end of that, looking back and seeing just how accurate the initial file was. I think has been great too. So we just appreciate your engagement throughout that process. We think that the PD that we did for district leaders was critical. We think that testing those code revisions with districts was critical to that process. And we think having that proactive corrections window was critical as well. And we think there's been trickle down impacts of that. We know that some of you have taken our PD right down to your school folks and had them working on pieces and ensuring there was delivery of that. We know some of you have engaged in a variety of other strategies here, and we appreciate your engagement throughout that process and work to bring us to a better place with the corrections window. The other piece here is that we know that we're delivering faster than we did, at least from the 2025 report card. We've got key milestones occurring earlier because we've worked to clear out as many roadblocks as we can at the agency level to doing that. We do think that the metric testing is improving our code. We also think for the districts that are participating with us, it's improving that transparency. We're giving you a clear insight into what we have, and we hope that's building some trust with you as well. And we've seen improved coding at the district and school levels. I mean, we wouldn't be at the corrections success we're having if your folks weren't helping us get the data right on the front end throughout that spring period, and if we weren't also improving our coding. So it's really been critical that every single group has been involved, and I think ultimately what we're seeing is the work we've put in. It's really paying off. There's minimal requests for changes. The embargo site launched, with enhancements and clarity around the embargo. I just think every single part we've got here is running really well. And special thanks to our district folks who are working on that, and thanks to the SCDE folks, because it really has been an all-out effort for the better part of a year now to bring a better 2026 report card to delivery. And I feel like we're at the crunch time now. We've only got a few weeks left in this process, but we've set ourselves up for success over the last few weeks, and look forward to continuing that with you, and looking forward to continuing to partner with you to bring this process to a close. So great news on all fronts here in terms of what we've seen so far, and looking forward to bringing it to a great close as well. Back to Ara.
All right, so as we'll bring it to a close, I'm going to talk a little bit about numerator window with y'all, and it will not be anything really new, but it's been a couple months since we talked about numerator window, and at that time, I think all of our minds were really on denominator window, and so we wanted to just have a quick moment to go over some key pieces of numerator window. I'm not going to take you through every metric and what's the denominator part, what's the numerator part. Feel free to go back to the corrections procedures PD that is posted to the website, and you're welcome to take a look at that and go through it, but I just did want to give you a little overview. So remember, we started with the denominator, that's who's included, and that has been set, done. Yeah, we've processed those corrections, and if we've missed something on that final file, Wendy's going to give you an update on that here momentarily, but I know our offices have turned back, or the agency has turned back out to y'all the kind of finalized denominator file, and then now that is going to get layered on for the numerator file. So during numerator, we're going to be applying those student outcomes, then the value of as the manual tells us, what's the value for that outcome, 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, on track, whatever it might be, the value will be applied, exclusions will be applied, and the metric then calculation will happen. And then finally, we'll have that metric review. But we've really layered all this and built all of it in mind that there's going to be almost previews that you could do, right, as we release each metric each week, so that you could already be taking a look, like how ML posted out today. You could take a look, oh, this aligns exactly how I thought it would with, or maybe it's off by 1 or 2 or something like that. So you have an idea of exactly where you need to zoom in whenever numerator review comes around. And of course, you'll be able to see as those metrics are populating if those things are lining up. But we, of course, have a system in place for you to submit those numerator review request. And then, of course, if the metric is off, also to submit your metric change notifications there. So denominator review, check. Numerator review will be coming up, having those on your calendars. The files will be delivered to you by August 31st. Of course, we'll send you out an email as early as those can get there, but we also want to make sure we're getting them to you as accurately as possible. So they will be delivered to you by August 31st for your review, and you'll have that week to work through reviewing your files, putting anything into the template and turning it back around to us so that we can review all your requests, and then we'll get an updated file out to you the week of September 21st. And after we turn that around, we will start working to finalize preliminary ratings. And we say preliminary because we know there could be an update in there as we work through processing everything if you notify us to something, or however it may work out. But ideally, what is posting up there in preliminary is where it all lands at the end, and that you're able to be really confident in what's going to be produced and out there for you. But of course, we can't say it's final till it's final. So numerator window kicking off August the 31st, and we'll have those files files to you by then so that you can verify your student outcomes and start preparing for what you expect those results to be. District submissions, you will do exactly what you did for denominator window. You'll use that eSupport SolarWinds ticket to alert SCDE that a correction needs to be processed for your district. And Wendy will go over those details with you momentarily. ADT is the spot for that secure information. You've got two main deliverables to us: an accurately completed corrections template where you're going to put in the students and what those outcomes are supposed to be, and a corrections plan that will review the steps that your district plans to take to resolve the issue. And I've got an example of that that'll be linked in the slides as well, that's more customized to the numerator window. Last window I had a denominator example for you. This one I'll have a numerator example for you. And I've got some pieces in there where maybe it was something in that transmission from Enrich to Admin Navigator, or something that seemed like you saw it right on your end, but it just somehow didn't land with SCD. I've got some wording in there like that for you as well. So there'll be an example you can use if you need that. But I can tell you from the last time, the more detail that you can give us to make clear what happened, the easier it is on our end to process that request, so that we can make sure that you're getting, what you would expect it to be, and that we're able to kind of work back through and get those details plugged in for the student. And then, of course, whatever you're submitting for, you're making sure that you have that proper documentation and that it does align with the rules of the accountability manual. So if you're noticing higher percentages, like, oh, this is a lot of records, it would be a good idea to go back. And as you could see from the denominator window, we didn't have a bunch of inconsistencies there. So if it seems like it's a large amount, going back to the accountability manual, going back to the PDs, and really making sure that your understanding of the rules or your school's understanding of the rules is lining up with what the rules really say, because generally through all the testing, the outcomes have been pretty spot on, and that 99% match rate, like we saw as Van showed, some of them could be dipped down to 99.7, but if you're seeing higher amounts, 10%, 15%, 20%, might need to look into the rules or into something with the coding just to see what might be going on there, because overall the code does seem to be lining up with the manual and what we'd expect those outcomes to be. So if you do find an error, research the concern, use the manual to make sure you're having those correct inclusion parameters. You've got our PDs as well that can help with what the coding requirements were, just so you can maybe see where that breakdown happened or what was supposed to be there. Finding the issue, making sure there's that evidence, right? If we're going to say somebody was a graduate or saying that they've earned a credit or whatever, it may be a test score, making sure that's there, and then completing your submission, filling in the template and completing your submission process. Did want to note, just like in the last window, we had student progress as an information only, just to say, hey, here's kids who had 2025 test scores, and we think they're probably going to have a 2026 one too. That was just an information piece in student progress. This time, participation rate is also information only. If a score outcome gets updated, then that will get corrected back to participation rate. So, if you said, oh, there was a score missing here, and then we get the score, then that will correct the participation rate. If it's an S&T issue, S&T is not correctable via this process. So if you did submit an S&T request and it was not approved, then that would be a spot to contact Lisa Woodard, and she will be able to provide additional clarification. And remember, we had a whole PD session on participation rate and students not tested. I believe that was session 4, April, and you could take a look at that. That is posted also in ADT for your access. So next up would just be when you get to the template. This is an example kind of screenshot of the template, but your template version will have the drop downs in there. I just did the kind of back end list here so you could see what all those drop downs would be. But you should be able to just use copy and paste for the student details, because everybody has been set in the denominator. Of course, unless it's going to be a high school achievement preparing for success ad, then you may have to type some stuff in for the student, but please do ensure that you are following the key pieces of information there, like you're using the school code, the district code, the school code, the state ID, all those things that are going to help us match that student up whenever we go to add them to your file. But of course, for high school achievement or preparing for success, remove, those you would be able to copy and paste. So generally copy and paste should be available as you're working through this metric because the inclusion piece has really already been set. Select the related metric. So what are you trying, which part of the overall report card is this correction related to? What is the input? Is it an SC Ready test score, an ALT test score, is, AP, IB, first year on track, second year on track? What is the input there? What is the current value? So you can see up at the top, those are more of your SC Ready and SC Alt with the does not meet and the foundational, the approaches, the emerging. Then you've got your EOC scores. And then you've got a lot of yes, no, because pretty much all the rest of them, like your ML, MET, your MET, SAT, ACT, MET grad rate, MET on track, all the rest of those are just yes, no. Did they meet it or not? So if current value is yes and you need to change it to no, you just put yes and then the correct value no, or vice versa. And you can see in there the highlighted yellow, those are updates from the last time because originally we weren't planning to have high school achievement in numerator, but it's going to be a part of this review. So you can also say to add or remove a student in the denominator. Of course, if you're adding for high school achievement or preparing success denominator, go ahead and put in that correct value. What is the test score going to be for that student, the ABC, DF? And then if it is the remove, then you would not need to pick an outcome. You would just say not applicable, remove. So those will be your drop downs there to basically just go walk us through where are we putting this outcome for this student, or where will we find what we currently have so that we can correct it. So select the metric, the input, current value, new value, and then complete your affirmations. That's another piece we had to kick back on a couple of districts whenever they sent them in the first time. Just none of the final affirmation columns had been filled in as a yes. And of course, that's something that is expected to occur. So I know that you might have multiple people working on filling things in, but as the final person who submits, just looking over every one of those columns and seeing that every column is formatted the way you would think that it would. It's all filled in. Student information's there. Each of the metric tabs are there. Each of the affirmations is there. Just one nice final glance. And then before you're turning it into us there in ADT. And then the last piece would be writing the corrections plan. And this may be something that you're doing along the way as you are finding things. And if you're going to be writing things along the way, maybe make yourself some buckets of the different, elements of the report card. So that way, as people are sending you things, you could just be bucketing them out there, your high school achievement, your grad rate, your on track, whatever the different buckets that y'all are finding stuff in, and then putting those pieces in just in a way that way, whenever we're looking back through them, there's a nice flow there. So just think about it before you get to the final submission. Is everything I'm asking for in my template also included here in my plan? And so that's the main piece there, is just that description of those errors. And then, of course, if those are errors that had occurred on the district side, what are y'all going to do to work for some improvement for this upcoming year and monitoring and reporting? So even for stuff that maybe was issue on how the data landed, that's still something that can be monitored as we look to make sure that 2027 is even better than 2026. And we will be reading all the plans just like we did in denominator window and going through and trying to work to get all those things processed and corrected as quickly as possible. So you've had the overview of the window and just the general details from me. And now Wendy is going to take you into a little bit more on the specifics like she always does. It does so well.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, just to reiterate, many thanks to all of you for all the work that you're doing on this. Just like with the denominator window, and I get to share with you
because
No.
it's not there.
All right, testing, testing. Can you all hear me now?
See if we get a new post. They're still saying it.
Still saying no?
Yes, we got a yes.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes. All right. Thank
Sorry
you
about that. Sorry
We
about
are
that.
monitoring the chat or
Okay.
the Q&A.
Yeah, I wonder. I was like, man, now everybody all of a sudden has a lot of things to say and questions. Thank you for letting us know. Okay, so let me just recap very quickly, and we'll get into the details here. So thank you again for all that you guys are doing to help this go as smoothly as possible. And one of the things that I'm going to lean in on here is just how to make sure that when you submit your request for your denominator or your numerator question corrections in this case, almost exactly like with the denominator window, we want that to go smoothly for you. We don't want to have to sort of kick it back to you and say, hey, this or that thing is, not quite right. We can't process the file because of these things. So here are the details on that. All right, so before what we call our core team is going to be able to do that substantive review of reading, like Era said, that plan is read from top to bottom, and time is taken on every single one to really think through what has been submitted. But before that can occur, what we have is sort of an automated first pass quality check for each corrections window. So that comes to my teams. Your ticket comes in. We reply and say, hey, we got it as long as you submit the ticket correctly, and we'll look at that in a second. Some tickets we had to kind of hunt for, but once we know that you're requesting corrections, we can then run a scan. We can add your files to a bucket and run a scan on those and just make sure that they can go on sort of to the next phase of actually getting that substantive review. So these are all these little nitpicky things that are really important just to make sure that that process continues. You don't get hung up on something. So make sure that you use the template, right? So it's a certain type of file. Don't turn it into a PDF or something like that, right? Just use, we had a few people who did that. Just keep it the same file type, if you would, please. Otherwise, we'll send it back to you. And the heading, the header needs to be the same. File naming, if you all would please remember, and you'll have instructions in what's sent to you with the template, please remember to use your district 4-digit code at the beginning of the file. We had a few more specific instructions about how to name it. Some people got a little more creative. We figured out some of that, but at the very, very least, if you could have those first 4 digits at the beginning, it helps. You got to make sure your planning document is there, right? We cannot promote your request without both of those files, both the Excel file that has the corrections that you've copied and pasted and made the values as they should be for what you're requesting, and then also the planning document. We just won't promote it until those are both there and in the correct format. All right. If there are drop-down options, please don't make up new ones, okay? Use what's there. Otherwise, we cannot programmatically process your file. And so those are going to be kicked back to you if you add new things. Please do not write comments in ID fields. That was one of my favorites. We had a few people who wrote like paragraphs of information in some ID fields. Please don't do that. Just an ID field is an ID field. We're just going to kick it back. If you have comments, put those in your ticket or send an email or something like that. That's not the place for comments. Let's see, what else? Those are the main things. Oh, and the certification columns, as Era mentioned, please for your certification columns, make sure that you got to say yes for those. Otherwise, that's part of the agreement, right? So you got to make sure those are filled out or otherwise it's not going to get processed. Okay. And one note here about 9GR, the corrected 9GRs are not going to be reflected in the data in column H because the student identifier data is going to pull from the data source, and you might not have corrected it in the source in a way that's going to pull that in for this particular file. So just make note of that. However, you're going to see some related data that has been changed to include in the denominator specified in the correction. So just a little heads up on that so no one's thrown off by that detail. All right, questions. What do you do if you have questions in this process? Okay, so you have a few routes you can take. If you have questions regarding the process, procedures, or policies, you guys are already, I know, very familiar with your SC School report card's email address. If you have issues with data that's displaying on the report card site, you can submit a SolarWinds ticket. Tight here. Sorry, I'm gonna pull up. All right. Forgive me, give me 1 second, everyone. All right, so you can submit that at esupport.ed.sc.gov. And if you have issues just sort of accessing an e-services or a SolarWinds, putting in a ticket basically, then you can reach out to Chad Johnson. That's cdjohnson@ed.sc.gov. And note that if you requested and had approved some denominator corrections, if those didn't process, if they were approved and they didn't process in your numerator file, you can also reach out via a new SolarWinds ticket. Right. So to submit a ticket, this is where you're going to go. You click new ticket. So that's at esupport.ed.sc.gov. And some important things to note here. So what you see on the screen over to the left is basically what you have to fill out. So make sure that you put your email or your name. Go ahead and put your district name and then report card corrections. One thing we did notice is that with some of the tickets that came in, some folks, I think, kind of assumed we could just get their information from their email. We probably can, but it's actually a little quicker for the agents that are monitoring that to just see who you are. If you can just go ahead and put your district name, that helps a little bit with the pace of processing what you've submitted. And then there's an example of what you can put in your description. So our district has placed all required documents for this corrections window in our accountability ADT folder. And this is to officially request that these corrections be made to our report card metrics. And also go ahead and include, we understand that we'll still be responsible for correcting this data at the source using the documentation that's been provided. So we have provided, and I'm also going to talk through here a little bit on how to make corrections at the source. The great thing about this process for you is that you don't have to wait till you've done all of that source correcting to submit your corrections using this process. So that was by design, and we think it's worked really well. So you're able to kind of go through all this and say, yep, that's one of those certifications, right? You say, yes, we know we've got to do that, and we're trusting that you're going to do that. And we can go ahead and kind of move forward and review what you've requested and not get hung up on on that piece. But there is a note over here to the right. I know it's a lot of text here, but basically it's just saying, for the numerator and the denominator corrections, that data is going to need to be corrected at the source. We're going to talk about how you would do that, and I'll get into the details of what's there here in a second. All right, so but with your ticket, you are going to be selecting, in this case, data support district, just like you did last time, but then for your subcategory, the dates for the numerator corrections window, so August 31st through September 4th, numerator corrections. And then you're going to notice that we have these other fields here. These are really handy in other situations, but you don't have to fill them out for this. So don't let that slow you down. All these, when these come to us, we're flagging them all as critical, urgent cases. So it is a high priority the week that we're doing this. We have somebody watching this the whole time. All right, so let's talk about source corrections. So let's say you've submitted your ticket and you're good to go. You've put your files in the ADT, you've done all that, and you're thinking, well, now, okay, I need to work with the appropriate person. Maybe it's you and a colleague to do some source corrections. A couple of reminders about how to do that. So step one, so first of all, there are two types of source corrections that we're going to talk about. One would be PowerSchool, the other would be assessments. So for your PowerSchool source data corrections, the first step is just to identify the fields that are related. Now, one thing I want to mention is that the fields in PowerSchool might not be like a one-to-one with what was in your template, if that makes sense, right? So there might be certain fields that it would make sense, that tie into that correction that you still want to correct in your source, but it might not be, called the same thing or even be exactly the same data point as, what you put in your numerator template is, okay, this is the correction that I'm requesting. Okay, so just keep that in mind that in some cases, that's how it is. In some cases, it might be the same, but so step two is to verify that the student is going to publish to EdFi. So for our PowerSchool folks, they're very familiar with this, but if you're working together, you may as well all kind of have a little bit of knowledge about this, which is if you have students who do not have an enrollment within the current year within that system, they're not going to default to be publishing to your current year EdFi environment, and that's a good thing, right? Because you wouldn't want all those students who don't have a current year enrollment publishing there. But one of the easiest ways for you to submit these in the source is to actually set those students to be able to publish to EdFi, and those records can be found. So that's how we're going to have you guys submit those at the source. So you don't have to kind of roll back to last year's EdFi or something like that, right? So you're just going to find those students. There's a little toggle called exclude this student from EdFi publishing. You're going to set it to no, right? So if they don't have a current year enrollment, they're going to be defaulting to not publish. You're going to make sure that they can by saying no to that. I know that can be a little confusing, but that's how you set it. And then be careful, because a couple of things to note about this. Any student who, if you switch it back to say, yeah, I want to exclude them, it's actually going to send a delete for that student's record to the current year. So don't feel like you can just set them to publish, and then set it back. Well, then it's going to kind of erase what you just did. So once you set that toggle, leave it there for the rest of the year for that child. And that'll just be included with your publishing for the year. Okay, you're just going to leave it. And then step 3, this is not something our team actually does not love to give the advice to do what we call a publish all. It takes time. Okay, so heads up on that. I would recommend doing all of your corrections in the source in PowerSchool. Then you're going to do what we call a publish all. The reason I suggest that, in some cases you might actually not have to, but depending on, there are all these little idiosyncrasies, right? So like maybe the student's been moved to the graduated school and you had to kind of set up that school to be able to publish, or maybe for some reason, that particular student, you're not able to publish just their record. So the way to get around that is basically just get all those corrections done for those students, and then kind of set a time when you know that, you have time to just sort of kick off those automatic publish alls for each publishing category, and it will scoop up all of the data in all the categories with all of your other publishing. It does take more time, so just be aware of that. That shouldn't be a surprise. Just be aware. All right. Okay, Runway, assessments corrections. So your assessment proxies, you might be the assessment proxy. If not, you can either reach out to find out who that is, or we also have them posted on our website. Some of you, I know, have been in the process of updating your assessment proxies with us, but those are your primary point persons typically for loading assessment data. I know in many cases it is an accountability director or coordinator in your district, so it might be you. Those corrections for assessments, it's actually even really easier, we think, than in PowerSchool, honestly, to get those corrections submitted at the source. If you need more information about how to use Runway, we have a link here and can make that available to you. And that has gone out in some information, but we can certainly make all these available to you, and we have them on a web page for you. If you're curious to know, well, hey, how do I need to set up the file, right? Because you have to use this CSV. If you've ever done this before, there's a file template that you have to use and make sure that certain fields are filled out, and typically they are. That's how the loading for this has been designed. But if you just want to be sure that your file is going to work, you can locate this page here that has the required data fields for assessment files used for CCR reporting. That might help you with some of your corrections. And here we have, I think, a repeat of a couple of these, but just to give you some other things. Some of this is maybe irrelevant to the to report cards, so just keep that in mind where it says may also be useful. That's other assessment loading information for maybe other purposes, but especially up here at the top, there's one that says assessment loading to EdFi web page. That has the breakdown of typically who is doing the loading, like are we doing a bulk load, or are you loading? But at this point, if you're making corrections, you can just go ahead and use Runway. That's what you would do. All right, and a little bit, again, repeat with the CCR assessment loading requirements, so I'll skip over that one. The next one that we have here is just a reminder, if you're looking in Admin Nav to kind of see assessment data, and also just within Stadium too, we have this intra-district assessment transfer process that was enabled back in April. And you can find the transfer records in Administrator Navigator under the dashboard assessment student detail. And there's a field there named assessment taken within district, and a value of no is going to indicate that this assessment record transferred from another district. So if you're kind of looking and checking there, then that might be useful to know about. And also just audit trail for bulk loads. So remember, a lot of these loads were done at the state, right, in a bulk load. And then you may be curious to know, as you're checking things, that bulk assessment loads to EdFi, so those that are completed for districts at some point, those have an audit trail in Runway. So if you wanted to, you could go and see the results of those, including student ID no match errors, right? So if you're like, well, gosh, I thought the state loaded this, I don't see the data, you might want to check that audit trail. And that's similar to what you would see if you were loading the file for yourself. So there could be something still that needs to be resolved. All right, and then one last thing, and then I'll hand it back over to Van and Era. So this next, after the numerator correction window, we have what we're calling the preliminary ratings correction window. And so just make sure that you have that on your calendar and somebody kind of available who can be looking out for that one. In this correction window, you wouldn't have those sort of source corrections that we just talked about. It's really more about the ratings and the calculation there. So you're still going to be submitting a SolarWinds ticket. The process is almost identical, just not so much about, data that was entered at the source and therefore resulted in something that needs changed, but rather more on the ratings and calculations side would be the third window, and that's coming.
And we'll hopefully not break the microphone as we swing it back around over here.
All right. Thank you, Wendy, for your updates there. As we get to the last phase of the information here and diving into the last critical pieces here of our work, we want to go back and just acknowledge how well the corrections and the processes are functioning so far, as well as the overall report card process. Schools, districts, SCDE have really improved data accuracy. We've tried to work on improving that transparency and ensuring we're delivering information in a timely manner. We hope we're communicating with you in a way that information is being received, and standardizing how you receive that communication and when you receive that communication. And we hope that also, as we go to the numerator corrections window, that the way we delivered information to you for the denominator corrections window, this is very much going to be aligned to that. And we're trying to build on that success and ensure consistency so the process is easy to manage on the district end. Okay. Our metric release cadence is structured to kind of support that numerator review and the ratings review. So we've got the numerator window coming up here in just a few days, really, a few school days, August 31st through September 4th. And then we have the ratings review coming up at the end of September. Those two pieces really are based off of the need there for us to take the numerator data that we get back from districts and review it on our side, and then make decisions and communicate about what has been approved. But please also start thinking through what celebrations you want to have with your district folks, whether it's your people who are doing the coding of data or your testing coordinators, whoever is ensuring that the data files are received and delivered. There's a lot of great news happening, and we've tried to do our best here to celebrate some of that today with you. We hope that you'll pass along some of those messages to the folks that you work with, because everybody at all levels is really doing an outstanding job here, ensuring that we have a successful delivery of 2026. And there's just a little bit further to go, but we appreciate your engagement to this last little bit of this process as we bring it to a close. And thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your work throughout the process. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact any of us. Our contact information is on the screen. You can just reach out to us, give us a call, or email us, and we'll get right back to you as fast as possible. But I appreciate your time today, and thanks for your continued partnership and support as we work to deliver the report cards. Have a great one.